Thank you very much. So with us today are the two candidates in the Democratic primary for House District 88, Jervonte Tay Edmonds and Clarence Williams. And we're going to begin with a brief opening statement. Mr. Edmonds, rather, you have the floor. Go ahead.
Greetings, everybody. Thank you so much for this opportunity to tell you why I am the best candidate to be the next state representative of District 88. As you've said, we've been almost without representation for almost a year. Right now, we need someone who knows and has the experience of being in the legislature. I've been honored to serve in the legislature for over 2.5 years, working under the leadership of State Senator Bobby Powell Jr., where I have the experience and I've learned how to write the bill, how to get it through committee, how to work with other legislators to do our job. Our job is to pass good bills, stop the bad ones, and most importantly, bring money back home to this county. Now, most people know me here in this county from my nonprofit Seuss for Seniors. It is an 8-week mentoring course in 25 high schools across the state of Florida. And we serve in 10 out of 12 Title I schools here in Palm Beach County, where we teach a mentoring course about leadership, financial literacy, how to go to college, career, trade. We even talk about mental health and domestic violence. At the end of the 8-week course, we give all of our students brand new tailored suits. 1,500 graduates, 100% have completed high school, and 95% have gone on to college. And we've also supported them with over $40,000 in scholarships to make sure that they complete college. I've also had the opportunity to work in the Criminal Justice Commission, where my only responsibility was to help reduce the jail population and look at the disparities in our criminal justice systems, like some of our residents getting high bonds and 30 days in jail for frivolous and nonviolent offense. I'm also proud to be an author of 2 best-selling children's books. And again, the most important thing is the experience. Right now, we need to hit the ground running. We've been without representation, and I have the experience, the relationship. I've already talked to the Democratic leader, Ramon Alexander, as we propose legislation for this upcoming session. So I'm ready to fight for the residents, and I have a distinct knowledge of each city in my district, and I'm ready to work. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Edmonds. Mr. Williams, you have the floor.
Thank you so very much for this opportunity. Clarence Williams. I am a retired law enforcement chief executive. I have over 45 years of public service. I'm also a retired lawyer. My last professional position was the past 16 years. I was the police chief in the city of Riviera Beach. Prior to coming to Florida, I practiced law for a little over 10 years. I practiced civil rights law and employment law. I have been working hard, solving real world problems and providing real world solutions. As a former director on the Florida Police Chiefs of Association Board, I've worked closely with legislators in Tallahassee to help shape and fashion and provide expert testimony on any number of law enforcement bills and other related bills. We have assisted Senator Bobby Powell in drafting legislation that was uniquely designed to provide relief to young people in the city of Riviera Beach. That was a summer youth employment program where we drafted the legislative rationale for that. After being asked so many times, Chief, what can we do to make a difference? As a practicing attorney, I am an advocate, a trained advocate. I've learned how to position and represent those who trust me with their concerns. District 88 is no different. It's a unique district. We have an understanding of the district. The district is roughly 60% African-American of color with a very unique concerns and desires associated with the district. So we're excited about the opportunity to offer the citizens of this district a choice. We're prepared, we're ready to hit the ground running based on our years of experience and working with others up and down the breadth and length of this state. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. I want to just dive in with a couple of questions here, and we're going to work around the room and work around the table, and Dan and Martin are also going to ask questions as well. Mr. Williams, I know you said you've interacted quite a bit with people in the legislature, and there's a very steep learning curve for a new member of the legislature. And so I just want to do sort of a little a bonus round of little questions here and just sort of learn about your basic knowledge of how things work in Tallahassee. What's the approximate size of the current state budget?
I don't know.
Okay. What is the difference? This is a part of the nomenclature of the legislature that's very important for the people who have to vote on issues. What's the difference between a bill and a joint resolution?
A bill is presented by individual representatives and can have co-sponsors. A joint resolution is typically something that is presented as a result of the work of both houses of the legislature.
Mr. Edmonds, you've been a legislative aide for about 2.5 years. Is Mr. Williams right? The difference between a bill and a joint resolution?
He is somewhat right.
You tell me what the difference is.
Well, he was correct when in saying the bill is made by a legislator from the House or the Senate, and the joint resolution is something that's been passed through both chambers, and they both have worked on it.
Okay.
And the question was about the budget. It was $110 billion last year, so it'll be around 120 probably this year.
Okay. Yeah, I think if you both check, you'll see the current budget is just about $100 billion, roughly $100 billion. And the difference between a bill and a joint resolution, and I'll defer to my colleague, Mr. Dykeman, who's got more experience even than me in this area. A bill is a piece of legislation usually filed by one member, but a joint resolution is the term used to describe a proposed amendment to the Florida Constitution, which can be filed in either house but must pass both houses.
That is correct. When you see something marked SJR or HJR, it is almost always a proposed constitutional amendment. If they want to pass a resolution on some other subject that does not have any force of law, it's just expressed simply as House HR or SR.
Okay. Mr. Edmonds, as you know, having been a legislative aide to two members of the legislature, you're a Democrat, but you're surrounded by Republicans in Tallahassee. So give me an example of a Republican that you've worked with who you respect and admire as being a good legislator or a good person in public life. Anyone?
Good. And that's a great question. I've worked with Representative Caruso down in Delray because he actually serves in a part of my district. And we've worked on plans with the set and making sure we can rebuild the infrastructure in Delray. So Rep. Caruso has been a good example. I can't say I agree with everything he's done in the legislature, but when it comes to his home district and representing and making sure that the residents have the resources that they need, I applaud him for his efforts.
Okay, Mr. Williams, the same question for you, sir. A Republican you admire?
A Republican that I admire? The governor is a Republican that I admire. I have not worked with him, of course, and I can't call the name of a Republican that I've worked with on any of my efforts to get bills or get a particular interest or voice a concern about a particular bill that was pending. So, okay,
that triggers my memory. In the questionnaire you filled out for us, Mr. Williams, your description of Ron DeSantis's record was adequate. I got to say, I think in the district you're running in, I think a lot of your potential constituents would not agree with you about that. So tell us how has DeSantis been an adequate governor in your opinion?
Well, I think he's been a governor that has been accessible. I like his movement on various issues. Not that I agree with them, but at least there is some response and movement. I believe that the state is doing as well as could be expected during the current pandemic. I liked some of the infrastructure moves that were made during the apex of the pandemic and that we continued building and working on roads and bridges and things while a lot of the state was experiencing shutdown. So I liked where he took advantage of the silver linings to move on some of those issues. So that's what I mean by adequate. So, and, separating out, of course, the social issues and our district is not one that is purely concerned and focused on, social issues. We all know that he lags in that area and those areas. Police reform, of course, being one of those areas. Education reform and higher salaries for teachers is another. This notion of being able to fund bonuses for law enforcement to the detriment of education. And we all say we value education, but yet we're not willing to pay for it. So I don't think it's fair to have persons whom we require to have 4 years of college to not be paid at the same level in terms of starting salary as those who we don't require of that. I think both of their missions are equally important and just. And if we value those things, then we need to spend the money on them. So overall, looking at all of the performance of the state, I would say adequate.
Okay. Let me ask you a quick follow-up question. You're well aware that he hired Joseph Ladapo, a California doctor, to be Surgeon General and head of the Department of Health.
Yes.
Was that a good decision? What do you think of that choice?
I think that there were plenty of Floridians that could do it. My sense was that he was looking for someone who would, parrot his position on the pandemic and support his decisions and direction as to how we navigate through the pandemic. So I don't agree with some of the positions of the doctor, nor the governor on that, and would do some things differently. So,
okay, Mr. Edmonds, how would you assess Ron DeSantis's record as governor?
Well, I believe being a governor, it cannot be an easy job, but I could tell you this: his response to COVID was horrible. We have the highest infection rates, one of the highest death tolls in Florida. And I don't think we actually look at each number and understand each family that's going through something, that has lost a loved one, that won't be with them for Thanksgiving or won't be able to give them a present for Christmas. And we spent more time putting lawsuits together to ban local governments and destroy home rule from putting on masks on kids than focus on getting people vaccinated. Only thing I can say I like that DeSantis has done is increase teacher pay to $54,000. That is a great plus. I'm glad that he's respecting and admires the hard work our teachers have done. I think we need to put more resources to our frontline workers, our healthcare workers that have given their lives to save the lives of the Floridians here in Florida. So Ron DeSantis, again, it's a tough job, but he has not done enough to push the needs that the Floridians have here.
Okay. I'm going to open the floor to either Dan or Martin to ask a question if they have one.
Yeah. Mr. Williams, you mentioned, we asked on the questionnaire your top 3 issues, and 2 of them that you mentioned, you simply said education reform and police reform. Can you explain a bit more what that means to you? What about education and policing needs reforming, and what reforms are needed?
Well, for me, initially, the reform that's needed in education, and I got as police chief and throughout my professional career, people always said we value education. Education is the key for underserved and persons who don't have all the privileges that others have. Education is the way out of that. If we believe that education is the way out, then we ought to be able to fund and elevate those salaries of the persons who are charged in that profession with delivering that service. So for me, it's important that we have that. And I think the measure ought to be what we do for law enforcement. So I'm of the opinion that in a given county where the starting salary for law enforcement is at one level, the starting salary for teachers ought to be at that same level. That's parity. in those starting sites. So that's the reform that I'm looking for, because then I believe that it will attract the quality of teachers that we need in order to get the job done. Police reform, I chaired the National Bar Association's committee on police reform and brutality. And we have authored papers on that subject. We have presented to other jurisdictions comprehensive plans on police reform that start with looking at the very laws and court decisions that get us where we are today. Those decisions that when you see it as a citizen, you say that looks like murder. But you see prosecutors who are not willing to bring charges because they realize that the burden of proof in law enforcement use of force cases is tremendous. And it's tremendous because of 2 Supreme Court cases. And before we see any change, any difference in that outcome, we're going to have to address those 2 cases. In addition to that, we talk about restoring civilian control of the Army. Right now, as civilians, we don't even know the questions to ask to bring about police reform. I've asked those tough questions. I've made myself available to municipalities to fashion and shape those questions that run the gambit from solutions to the proper interaction with unions, to creating police commissions that will be responsible for creating policy and overviewing those policies and interacting with communities. So the plan is I call it a 7-point plan. It's available on our website that starts with that. And last but not least in that area, of course, statewide adopting and pushing the adoption of a similar act to the George Floyd Justice Act, and creating some of the components there and or supporting those once passed at the federal level that would involve and allow local state prosecutors to do their jobs more efficiently in overviewing and restoring civilian control to the Army, to law enforcement.
Do you think police officers should have qualified immunity, or should there be some sort of an insurance scheme, similar to medical malpractice?
I think the days of qualified immunity have run their course. I think that the reality is that when we bring an action, we bring in an action against the deepest pockets. And if we give the officers qualified immunity, nobody's suing them anyway. And it doesn't accomplish what it is that we're trying to accomplish. And what that is getting appropriate review and accountability of police uses of force, and bringing about real restoration of civilian oversight and input on that very vital governmental service delivery, and that's law enforcement. So,
okay, thank you, Mr. Edmonds. I wanted to ask you a similar question, not in the same subjects, but you had a similar thing on your questionnaire where 2 of your top 3 issues were affordable healthcare and criminal justice reform. And I'd like you to go a little bit more into those, because there's all sorts of things you can do to possibly make healthcare more affordable, and all sorts of reforms for criminal justice. What exactly are you talking about there? What would you want to see done?
Okay, so in particular with healthcare, it's essential. The federal government matches our state funds for Medicaid, and year after year, our governor has refused those funds. So it's really working with the governor to actually approve those funds, just to match simple Medicaid funds and expand services for millions and millions of residents. So that's a very simple fix, I believe. Now, when we're talking about the criminal justice reform, I've been fortunate enough to work for the Criminal Justice Commission, where my job was a safety and justice analyst. And one thing we've noticed, a lot of residents who are getting jailed have mental health issues, because we lack the mental health resources here in this county. So we need to look towards actually getting a facility that can help those people and be proactive instead of sending those people to jail. The next thing we need to look at is decriminalizing some of these nonviolent offenses. The thing that we realize that most of low-income people are being locked up for is not having a license, possession of marijuana, and petty theft. Now, we can't do anything really about the petty theft because that's somewhat of a violent offense, but driving without a license and possession of marijuana, there was this program Palm Beach County used to have, which was called Community Court. I would love to see that refunded and reinstalled back into our community. Essentially, we gather retired judges and they deal with nonviolent offenses such as driving without a license and possession of marijuana. So instead of sending someone to jail for 30 days and giving them a $10,000 bond, they would go to a community court with a retired judge and receive the social services that they need to get back into society and not put them in jail when they can potentially lose their job and create a whole cycle of poverty just through being locked up. And so it's really about decriminalizing those nonviolent offenses, creating a community court so we don't have to send people to jail, and again, providing mental health services beforehand. Right now, our sheriff is the largest provider of mental health services. And it doesn't help to go to jail and then receive mental health services. So those are the three things that I think that people can agree on that I think we can work with.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Mr. Edmonds, the program you're associated with there, Suits for Seniors, sounds like a very, very worthwhile program, but I've got a couple of questions about, I'd like you to educate my colleagues and me about where does Suits for Seniors get most of its financial support from?
That's a great question. So we get most of our financial support from individuals, corporations, and grants. So we have roughly around maybe 500 to 600 people who give each and every year to our program and this cause. We have grants from people like the Quantum Foundation, the Community Foundation, the Jim Moran Foundation. Most of the larger foundations that are in this community, they have supported Suits for Seniors. And most importantly, we have corporate foundations such as BMW, Comcast, FPNL. We have a lot of great corporations in our community that have really given to our cause.
Okay. You're no doubt well aware that as a legislator, unlike an aide, as a legislator, you're actually voting on matters that affect people every day of the week. And companies like Comcast, some companies like Comcast and FPNL have a huge stake in the outcome of bills in the legislature. Tell us how you balance the fact that you seek financial support from an entity like FPNL with having to vote on matters that affect FPNL.
Well, one thing is I'm very grateful that we've been in existence for over 6 years and we've been able to impact almost 1,500 kids. But the one thing about our nonprofit is that we do not rely on one particular source of income or revenue. And so we would never have to rely on a big corporation to make sure that we can continue to impact another 1,500 kids. But in particular, our Democratic leader, Ramon Alexander, who is a great friend of mine, he's almost like my twin. He has a nonprofit that does almost the same thing we do, is help young men out and put them in college. So I work directly with him to understand the process to make sure that everything is lined up and every day we're fighting for the average day person.
Okay. Is there a place where the public could look to see, does Suits for Seniors have to file either a 990 or something that lists all who their donations are coming from?
I'm glad you asked that question. No matter how much I ask for, whether it's $1 or $10,000, we have to, one, show our financials, and two, we have to give our strategic plan. And I think that's important because having strategic plans over and over throughout the years has put me in a mindset that when we are going to the legislators, that we have to have a strategic plan to build a foundation on legislation to make change at the year. And so again, you can find all of our information on our 990. We have to show our largest donors, how much we make, our expenditures. We have to record it all. It's also logged in through the state government as well.
Okay. Mr. Williams, I have a question for you about your opponent, and that is this. This is my opinion. I think endorsements maybe are overstated in politics and in campaigns, but it did catch our attention that Mr. Edmonds has the endorsements of people like Senator Lori Berman, Senator Tina Polsky, Senator Bobby Powell, who we used to work for. People who already have senior positions in the Palm Beach County legislative delegation think Mr. Edmonds would be a good addition to the delegation. Well, how should voters interpret that?
Well, they should take those representatives at their word. That's their That's their position. How we got here is unique. Most of us were preparing for an August primary, and the governor, in his infinite wisdom, announced a special election. I didn't anticipate that, and certainly none of the other 4 or 5 persons who had filed to be in this race had anticipated that. Mr. Edmonds has been working hard. He has leveraged and taken advantage of the contacts that he's had and asked those persons earlier on before others had committed to get into the race. And so he's to be commended for that effort. But we are confident that as we shape and mold our campaign moving forward, that we are touching those pockets of voters that represent this district. And that's where we're focusing on. We're focusing on those groups that provide large services to this district. So, we're pleased with the endorsements that in the short period of time that we've been ramped up, that we've been able to obtain. The Palm Beach County Black Caucus, the Palm Beach County Human Rights Council were my first 2 efforts. The newspapers have been the next set of efforts that have presented themselves. So we have focused more on identifying those persons in the community, in particular clergy that will support us because of their positions. Of course, they can't publicly state and or endorse, but we're happy with where we are strategically.
Okay. Tell us briefly, what is the Palm Beach County Black Caucus? What is that?
It's a Democratic caucus comprised of individuals in Palm Beach County who have expressed interest and desire in making certain that services and governmental issues are presented in the best light for the persons that they represent and throughout their caucus.
Does it include elected officials?
There are no elected officials that I'm aware of.
Okay. Mr. Williams, I want to return to law enforcement just for a moment.
Sure.
Remind us what years were you the police chief in Riviera Beach?
From 2002 until 2018.
Okay. In looking at news reports, well, let me back up. Why did you leave? Why did you leave that position?
I retired from that position.
Okay. In looking at news reports, I see that it was not until 2018 that police officers in Riviera Beach were equipped with body cameras. Were you a proponent of body cameras for the police in Riviera Beach?
Yes, Riviera Beach led the entire county in the use of technology. We actually created and coined the term TOP, T-O-P, technology-oriented policing. Our technology-oriented policing scheme was presented and we were able to obtain from the Florida Police Chiefs Association in competition with other large police agencies, the top award, the Rocky Pomerantz Award for police excellence. So body cameras, drones, all of the latest and greatest law enforcement technologies from ShotSpotter to triangulation. All of that was developed during the 16 years that I was police chief in the city of Riviera Beach.
Okay. Mr. Edmonds, as you pointed out to us, you've been in this district, in this community for a long time. So that gives you a lot of, though you're a young man, it gives you a lot of institutional knowledge. You tell us, what kind of a job did Mr. Williams do as police chief in Riviera Beach?
Well, I think Riviera Beach is a beautiful community with so much opportunity. I think we have an influx of businesses flooding to Riviera Beach. And I think we have an opportunity to really take advantage of what's coming to Riviera Beach, from our marina to the beautiful attraction that we have throughout this county. So I think that it's never an easy job to be a chief of police. And I think he did within his best realms and best what he could to fight for his city.
If we, Mr. Williams, if we check the record, because you've mentioned it in this interview, if we check the record, are we going to see that you fought aggressively to raise the salaries of the rank and file police in Riviera Beach?
Oh, absolutely. We created the salary scale that they had that was implemented for officers in Riviera Beach. So yeah, we fought for officers, not only for salaries, but for working conditions. They had the best equipment that money could buy. They had the best technology that money could buy. Look, Riviera Beach is a beautiful community, and I've served as a chief executive officer in other larger communities. And I've been here 20 years. What I've realized is that Riviera Beach is just like any other urban setting in America. There are areas of town that the Chamber of Commerce is not going to encourage you to visit. And Riviera Beach is no different. Riviera Beach has a beautiful barrier island. Millionaires live there. You cross the intercoastal, you can be in any urban setting in America with all the attendant urban problems associated with that. You get west of Congress Avenue in Riviera Beach, gated communities, golf course communities, one of South Florida's major theme attractions, the Rapids Water Park. Almost 750,000 people a year come through that water park visiting Riviera Beach. But just like any other city, there are areas that have their problems. But I'm telling you this, for the 10+ years leading up to our retirement, we reduced crime in Riviera Beach by 52%. The overall crime statistics, that's stuff that if we get it wrong, police chiefs go to jail. Those statistics will show for the 10-year period leading up to my retirement that the overall crime in Riviera Beach was lower than Boca Raton's. The overall crime in Riviera Beach was lower than Delray Beach, was lower than Boynton Beach, 2 times lower than West Palm Beach. But because the broader media...
Mr. Williams, is that totals or is that per capita?
That's totals. Per capita is flawed. And it's flawed in Riviera Beach because Riviera Beach doesn't own its own zip code. Riviera Beach shares zip codes with West Palm Beach and with Palm Beach Gardens. And these entities that report per capita report based on zip codes. And so
I get that, but isn't it also kind of flawed to compare a city the size of Riviera Beach to a city the size of West Palm Beach?
Well, of course,
you're talking total numbers?
Yeah, well, it is absolutely unfair. But the reality is that is the comparison as a police chief that I was often faced with when having to fashion our responses to criminal activities and to answer why things are occurring in our city and not in another city. So because the two cities are so intertwined in their relationships and interactions of citizens, yes, we have to consider that. And the reality is there's no true comparison, only those other cities, but often the comparison is made.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Williams, I think you were making a point about the larger media and its characterization of Riviera Beach. I'd like to hear the rest of that thought, if you don't mind.
Well, the rest of that thought is, look, Riviera Beach is 10 square miles. It's 10 square miles. The crime statistics are as I just reported to you. Check them out as I reported to you. The notion, if you believe the broader concept, is that the community is going to hell in a handbasket and nothing could be further from the truth. What happens is that out of the 4 major media outlets, print, 3 TV stations, all of them are within a 10-minute drive of Riviera Beach, when their viewing area is much broader. So if you're a reporter and you got a choice between covering a shooting that's a 10-minute drive and covering a shooting that's a 15-minute drive, oftentimes you're going to opt for the shorter one. And so what happens is that it got over-reported, creating that perception in Riviera Beach. But the reality is what I explained to you in terms of those overall numbers. So that's the perception, and that's what we battled with in Riviera Beach up until the very end.
I'd like to ask Mr. Edmonds very briefly if you agree or disagree with what Mr. Williams, Chief Williams, just said about Riviera Beach being unfairly portrayed as having a more serious crime problem than statistics would show. Do you agree with that?
Well, the thing is, I think District 88 covers more than just Riviera Beach. I think each city has their own unique issues. And I think we really got to look at how we work on those issues for each and every city within that district. I think Riviera Beach is a gem. I think they have companies flocking to that area. And I think it is best that we work with the leadership that they have to continue to build opportunities. And again, affordable housing for the residents in Riviera Beach.
Okay. Martin, do you want to jump in with a question?
Yes, a little bit of background. When I covered the legislature in the 1970s, I learned that the people there who deserved the most respect, at least from my point of view, were those whose belief in personal integrity, in civic responsibility, and in fidelity to the principles of democracy governed everything they did. And which brings me to the present. Because there's a Republican in your race, whoever wins is unlikely to be seated in the legislature before the session is essentially over. Meanwhile, the governor, everybody knew that these vacancies would exist the day that people submitted their resignation to run for the Congress. And yet the governor stalled about calling these special elections, indicating, in my view, he has a fundamental disrespect for democracy. What, if anything, can you as a legislator do to make sure that future governors won't be able to behave the way this one did?
Go ahead, Mr. Edmonds. Go ahead.
All right, and I just dropped my headphone. Sorry about that. Well, that is a very important question. And as you know, we've been without representation for almost a year in this particular legislature. And since Amari Hardy put his resignation in, I've been traveling back and forth to Tallahassee, working with the current leadership, focusing on different ideals and legislations that we can propose in this upcoming legislature. Now, right now, it's not just about the title and being elected. It's about being present and being heard and represented at the table. I've been able to sit with the Black Caucus of the Florida Black Caucus and talk over different agenda items and things that we need to do to move forward. So right now, electing me is the best chance we have to having some type of representation to appeal some of these voter restrictions that's been placed on us, to talk about redistricting that's coming up in August. I'm in the perfect position to work with the current members and leadership to get something done. Excuse me, I had to get my headphones.
All right.
Yes.
Go ahead, Mr. Williams.
You know, the reality is that, look, the Republicans control both houses. And unlike my Democratic friends, when Republicans are in charge, they act like they're in charge. You know, it's not fair what the governor did. Bottom line, it's just not fair. Leaving not only District 88, but other districts throughout this state, you know, unrepresented. He could do that. And whatever the motivations are, and I believe that they were all politically motivated. The reality is, by calling this special election, you know, he has created, you know, turmoil for the district and candidates in the race. It's unfair to the electorate because you don't get a chance to vet candidates for the length of time that the candidates were anticipating the election would run, because the reality is that you're not going to be seated because it's going to be a general. And this is just that a tragic and difficult situation that is unfair, where the governor has acted out of political motivations. What can you do? All you can do from your bully pulpit, all I've ever done as a lawyer from my bully pulpit, is advocate on behalf of those that I represent. And so I would do the same thing for this district. We would advocate on behalf of those who have been disenfranchised by this governor's action. But the reality is, until we mobilize as voters and make a difference with the makeup of the elected houses of this state, we're going to get these same kinds of results, from this effort to gerrymandering, to lack of response to COVID rollout, to unemployment processing and all of that have adversely impacted communities of color. 60% of that demographic is whom I'm seeking to represent.
Okay,
Steve,
go ahead. I'm sorry. Go.
may I ask a question?
Well, I have a brief follow-up to that question. Does it not seem to either of you that you could attempt to amend the law to require the governor to schedule special elections at the earliest possible opportunity rather than stalling on them?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's what legislators do. You know, but the reality is that you know that that's going to be an uphill battle. Is it something that a responsible Democratic caucus of legislators would do? Yes. Is it something that you would bring if you were adversely affected in your particular district to that body in their discussions of what things we champion and try to move forward? Of course. I mean, that's how it works. And so, yes, that's a process that you would follow. And yes, I'm sure both of us thought of that.
Mr. Williams, the last time Governor Ron DeSantis was in West Palm Beach, we report it was about a month ago, and he went to the Hilton Hotel near the airport, and he had a rally. And this is where he announced this program to create a unit of sworn law enforcement people in the Division of Elections to police elections fraud. He wants to be more aggressive with policing elections fraud and wants to have sworn law enforcement people doing that. He has to have the legislature's approval to create this unit and create the budget for it. So what do you think of that idea, that concept?
Bad idea, bad concept to use sworn law enforcement. You know, it's a merging, it's an overreach and merging of branches. And it shouldn't happen. It's fraught with all kinds of possibilities. So it's not a good idea. It's not something I would support. If he wants to do that, you know, create an enforcement arm. It could be retired law enforcement folk who have investigative abilities and those kinds of things. On its face, making certain that our election process is one that is safe and that everybody has access to and feels comfortable with participating in, you know, is a good thing. But having sworn law enforcement with concealed weapons in and out of areas and trying to regulate voting issues, I think is flawed. So if he wanted to get there, he can create an independent, civilianized investigative arm that could do the same thing.
Mr. Edmonds, what's your opinion about what DeSantis proposed with voter fraud?
I would like to look more into what he did just recently, but I'm sure it was a ploy to create more voter suppression and infringe on the rights of voters. Right now, I really think we should be focused on Senate Bill 90 and trying to find out ways to appeal some of the regulations that come with it. The ballot harvesting, I completely understand and agree with that part of the Senate Bill 90, but closing off times where voters can put in their absentee ballot has really put a limit and strain on our potential voters. So I think we should be focusing on a strategic plan to give our voters the right to express themselves as they see fit, and which is a basic right.
Okay. Still on the subject of elections, let's talk about something else Ron Desantis did that directly affected the people of Palm Beach County, your potential constituents, Mr. Edmonds. He forced out your former supervisor of elections, Susan Booker, and replaced her with Wendy Link. Was that the right decision?
Well, I would be honest and say I have a more relationship with Wendy Link. I think she has done a phenomenal job as our supervisor of election. I think she has found the gaps within the process, and she has done everything possible to advocate for more staff and employees and resources to educate voters. When Senate Bill 90 happened, I saw Wendy Link going on a tour around this county to tell people how there has been voter suppression by a governor. So I'm not familiar too much with Susan, but Wendy, I think, has done a phenomenal job.
Mr. Williams, how about you? What about the decision the governor made with the supervisor of elections?
I don't have all the details or information that the governor had when the governor made his decision, but there was a change, and then there was a subsequent election, and the current supervisor of election took part in that election against some very good quality candidates, and she prevailed. So that same process, election process, would have been available to the ousted supervisor of election, I believe, and they chose not to participate. So without having all the information that the governor had, having an opinion on the rightness or wrongness of it is beyond me. But looking at the process that followed and the results of the process that followed, I agree with Mr. Edmonds that the current supervisor of election has done some remarkable things since being elected to the office.
Okay. Mr. Williams, I've got a question for you. Jervonte Edmonds, correct me if I mischaracterize this, but in Mr. Edmonds's questionnaire, one of the things he pointed out that he thought was a big mistake by the Florida legislature was the bill that they passed last year, Senate Bill 1028, which basically marginalized transgender athletes. Am I right, Mr. Edmonds?
Correct.
Yeah. This bill was thought to be dead, and as often happens in Tallahassee, it reemerges as an amendment late in the session. I want to ask you, Mr. Williams, about what is the appropriate way the legislature should approach transgender student athletes.
Transgender athletes should be and allowed to participate, consistent with the gender that they identify with. Bottom line. And there should be no restrictions as to that participation. Clearly, we would have whatever the medical qualifiers are to make certain that the competition is fair. So limiting that adversely and in the fashion that the governor has, and the legislature rather, some legislators have chosen to do that is purely a knee-jerk reaction, and one that should be opposed vigorously.
Okay. Mr. Williams, another question, sir. Do you think the state of Florida should legalize recreational use of marijuana?
No. I've had a long-standing position, and it's probably consistent with my professional colleagues for the 16 years that I've been involved with law enforcement in Florida, from the Florida Police Chiefs Association down to my presidency as the Palm Beach County Chiefs of Police president of the association. The organization and professionally, we have opposed, the complete legalization of marijuana just because of the unknowns. and because of the anecdotal things that we see professionally that are associated with abuses of that particular drug.
You mentioned unknowns. Give us an example of what one of the unknowns is.
For me, an unknown would be what are the long-term effects of daily and constant use? What are the secondhand effects on those who choose not to? For me, are key and paramount.
Okay. Mr. Edmonds, yes or no? Should Florida legalize recreational marijuana use?
I believe if properly regulated, yes. And I believe we also need to look at expunging some of the records of those who have small amounts of possession of marijuana. Right now, there's almost maybe a $4 billion marijuana industry going on in Florida, and we still have people who have small offenses in our jails. So I believe, yes, we should legalize if properly regulated, and also look towards expunging some of those people with minimal amounts.
As I recall on your questionnaire, something like that happened to you personally, right, Mr. Edmonds?
Yes, as a teenager, I have been through those experiences. So that's why I am in support of legalizing it and making sure those who have been in those situations can have support.
Okay. You know, this is a good time. We don't have a whole lot of time left, but this is a good time to bring something up that that certainly is either one of you would face, both of you will face, whoever wins this election. There are going to be times when the House Democratic Caucus is going to want to take a caucus position on a bill, which means you are obligated to vote the same way as your Democratic caucus members, whether you personally agree on that or not. And let's say there was a bill to legalize the recreational use of marijuana. I have no doubt that the vast majority of members of the House Democratic Caucus would support that. And Mr. Williams, you know, we certainly respect your right to disagree, and you've put forth a rational argument against it. But I want to start with you, Mr. Williams. Give me an example of something where you think the Democratic Party is off base. I'm talking about in Florida on some issue.
That's a great question, and I'm running through my mind issues that where we might be considered off base. So I mean, beyond the issue of the complete legalization of marijuana, I'm not there professionally. My 45 years of experience and interaction and anecdotal experiences with marijuana use and seeing some of the adverse consequences of that, so I'm just not prepared to say that. I agree, we need to be, since we are moving in that direction, minimizing, creating drug courts for minor drug violations, helping expunge some of the records of those who have those kinds of records around small uses, decriminalize the minor possession of small amounts of pot. So all of those things are reasonable that get us there, short of complete legalization. So it's all we're already solid with the medical use, and with the medical use, there is some medical doctors that are involved and with it. So and as far as the caucus is concerned, one of my mentors in the legislature, because when he was there when I was director for Florida police chiefs, and I got a chance to move about the halls and see different things, but was Joe Gibbons. And Joe was the kind of guy that didn't mind standing up when it wasn't real popular, and of course there are consequences for that in terms of your party, but reasonable minds can differ. So I'm there. We're ready to do that, but we agree, just like with our Republican colleagues. For me, it's not about finding and working on those polarizing issues, but let's find those issues where we have commonality and then work to resolve those. Who could be against reasonable police reform? Who can be against helping young people have summer employment opportunities with the proper private-public partnerships? Who could be against those things to some degree?
Okay, thank you. And very briefly, Mr. Edmonds, an example where you think the Democratic Party in Florida is off base. Can you think of one?
Well, I want to say that I'm very proud and grateful that I've been endorsed by almost over 50 Democrats, elected and former elected officials. And I believe one thing about our party is that we have to work as a team. I believe that sometimes we can create dysfunction within our own team by not always agreeing, but sometimes we have to agree to disagree and work together to get the job done. In the legislature, it's about getting little wins, especially when you're the minority party. And at times you will have to stand in the paint on issues that are against your morals. But realistically, the thing that we have to do most is work as a unit. I don't think we're off base. I think we may be off messaging and how we portray the things that we're trying to get across. I think we also need a strategic plan. I think we need to make sure that we have a plan for almost 5 to 10 years out on the different policies that we want to enact and the different amendments that we need to roll back. So again, I don't think we're off base, but maybe off messaging. And I think we got to continue to work together to get the job done in Tallahassee.
Okay. We're just about out of time, but we want to do something we do in all of these interviews. We want to give each of you a chance to make one brief last pitch. I'm going to limit it to about 1 minute. If you had a minute on a street corner to sort of persuade a voter to vote for you and not your opponent, or why you're the best candidate, now's the time. Mr. Williams, we're going to start with you. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Voters in District 88 deserve a choice. They don't deserve anointing of candidates. They deserve choices. I asked the voters of this district to treat this as a job interview. I'm asking them to look at the resume of the individuals, look at the body of work, ask the tough questions, and then you make the decision. We're prepared to hit the ground running. Why? Based on my breadth and length of experience. Over 45 years of public service, working up and down the length and breadth of not only this jurisdiction, but another jurisdiction in the country, working with the state legislators to provide a real world solution to real world problems. We have led on police reform. We have led on summer youth employment. In my other life, I actually ran a summer youth employment nonprofit with an $8 million budget. And it had a tremendous impact where we serviced over 8,000 young people in the city, providing them those opportunities. So I've seen it work. I know it can work. It's what's needed in our district. Our district is one where we have to meet our residents where they are, addressing their concerns. Look, the overarching state issues are going to always be there. And we're going to do what we do as state legislators. We're going to educate ourselves. We're going to inform ourselves. We're going to make the right decisions that are in the best interest of the district that we represent. But in addition to that, I'm asking them to say, this is not a stepping stone for me. I don't need another job. I don't need another award. I don't need another pension. It's about service. It's about choices. It's about having an individual in Tallahassee who can hit the ground running, articulating your positions, your issues, and advocating for them, as I've done historically throughout my career in public service. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Edmonds, you have the floor.
Right now, currently, there's a pandemic outside. Currently, there are people in my community who can't afford to put groceries in their fridge. There's people in my community that can't afford the places to live in my community. Right now, we are in a state of emergency, and what we need is someone who has done this job before, someone who has the experience and relationship with the legislators to make a change and tangible difference, someone who has been around this community, servicing this community his entire career. I didn't become the nonprofit of the year, the best nonprofit executive back to back because it was talk or because of a nice suit. It's because we made tangible change and tangible impact. I haven't been elected to be the board of trustees for the Black Chamber of Commerce, the Chamber of the Palm Beaches, the North Chamber of Commerce, because I didn't know what I was talking about. I've been able to work across the aisles in all aspects in business, education, criminal justice system. And right now, what our district need is someone who has been there and will be there for the next 8 years, a state representative fighting for them. And that is me. As I've done in the past, is make a tangible change. I will continue in the future to make a tangible change for our residents in education, affordable housing. And what people continue to ignore is clean water. And I just hope that I can get the support, prayers, and the vote of the community I serve. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Mr. Edmonds. Thanks, Mr. Williams. Appreciate your participation and your work on the questionnaires. Best of luck to you both. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.